Hello everyone, welcome to Dessert Paranormal. I'm Tabitha Cunningham and I'll be your host today. Today we're going to be talking about some of my paranormal experiences that I experienced while working at an animal clinic. I worked there for about a year and I was the custodian / kennel attendant, which essentially means that I cleaned everywhere on the property, and I took care of the animals. For one, we also boarded them, not just treated the animals. So when I first started off, everything was fine. I had an interesting, I think it was like second or third day, I actually found a baby snake in the treatment room I was mopping, and apparently this was the first time something like that has ever happened in the clinic. And I know that doesn't seem significant, but the more I talk, maybe it will be. Let's see, the first major thing that happened that really kind of started my paranormal journey, like to spiritual warfare and everything, was when I think I had worked there for about a month, and I was the only person there. I was waiting for my ride. At the time I didn't have a car, and I was waiting for my dad to come pick me up, and all the lights were off, and I was just chilling in the hallway at one of the little desks, and listening to music. Really good day, in a great mood, really calm and chill. And it was all good until I started to hear something being moved. But at first I ignored it, and then it happened again, and it sounded like heavier equipment in the treatment room. And I kept hearing it, and then so I turned off my music, and I listened, and I could still hear it. And so I got up, went to the little doorway to the treatment room, and as expected, no one was there. Because at first I thought maybe one of my coworkers came back and I just didn't hear him come in somehow. But there was no one there. But then all of a sudden I got this feeling of this presence. It was just felt really dark, and it really freaked me out a little bit. But I just didn't want to deal with it. I'm just like, well, no one's here. I'm just psyching myself out. I'm going to go sit down and just do what I've been doing until my ride comes. Well, as soon as I turned to do that, right in front of me, just a few feet, was this entity. And I was seeing it in my mind's eye. That's the best way I can explain it. But I saw it. Like, I didn't imagine it. It's just there. And it was this tall, very thin, lanky entity. It had yellow eyes. It was dark. And its mouth was round and had sharp teeth, kind of like a leech's mouth. And it looked just as confused as I was. I don't think he expected me to be there. And remember, I'm new. So, and of course I didn't expect to be seeing it. So, and then obviously I got pissed off because I'm just like, you're ruining my day. But pretty much I was like, and I pretty much told it to piss off. And I'm sorry, I shouldn't be using that word, but that's what I said to it. I told it to piss off, and, that it didn't belong there. And, but then I realized, hey, because at this point, I had already technically started my journey with spiritual warfare, but this was the first time I was actively doing it. Before that, it was just reading books and stuff, and I was unburying a lot of suppressed memories from having to deal with the occult and my birth mom was in an occult, and had tons of paranormal experiences, but I kind of just blocked a lot of it out, and I was starting to let myself, I was starting to unlock things, let's just say. And I realized, like, wait a minute, the first time in my life, there's something paranormal going on. And I can leave. So I said, screw this. And I went to go outside. Well, I can't just go outside and not lock the door and set the alarm. I have to do that, or else I can get in a lot of trouble. And so I'm going down the hall, and it's a very long hall, and I'm going down the hall, and this thing is following me. I feel it following me. And it still has this sense of confusion on it. And I set the alarm, and I went to pull out my keys for my purse, and you have about 60 seconds to be out and lock the door before the alarm is activated. Well, in my dumb purse, the thing was buried, and so I'm having to try to dig it out. And of course, this is my anxiety shooting, because, like, this is how people die in movies. Not that I was really afraid about dying or anything. I actually wasn't worried about getting hurt. Most of my anxiety had to do with the fact that if I don't hurry up, get this locked before this alarm turns on, the police will come, my boss will have to be called, and then I would have to explain why the hell I, didn't, lock the door in time. And the thought of having to explain that was petrifying. And so, but I did it. I managed to do it. And I was outside. I locked the door. And I'm like, okay. And I could still see it looking at me. And at that point, I couldn't see it anymore. I just felt it looking at me. Because from the glass door. And I hear a car coming up, and I'm in this enclosed fenced area. And I'm like, okay, cool. My dad's here. Start going to leave the gated area. But then I realized, and I said this, and I was like, that's not Dad. And it was this red truck, and the evil that was coming off the entity was also coming off of this red truck. The very exact same type of energy. And I'm like, crap. And so I dashed back. Now, I'm not going back in, but I just kind of pinned myself against the wall and hoped they hadn't seen me. And I got my phone out, and I was ready to dial, well, first I, kept trying to text my dad, hey, because he was already a little bit late. And, Dad, pick me up, Dad, pick me up. And it turned out he didn't have his phone at the time. And he also forgot. So, and when I wasn't getting any response, I said, ready to, call the police if I needed to. And I'm just listening and I'm waiting and I'm listening and waiting. Felt like an eternity. It was only 10 minutes. But then I hear the car drive off. I go back and I see it's gone. But now my anxiety is like really up. Because I was more afraid of like there being people that could hurt me kind of thing. And I rebuked the entity that was still inside the building. And it got very, I don't know if it had got a buddy or what, but I started getting noises from the barn, and since my anxiety was already up, that kind of freaked me out. And then what was really upset me was that the dogs in the kennel area, they started yelping, barking, crying, like they were freaked out. And it was just so sudden. And I'm just like, not my animals. I was very protective of all the animals I took care of. And I started rebuking. And I rebuked. And I rebuked. And I felt more threatened. And so and like I said, my anxiety was already up. So this was just making everything worse. And I'm rebuking it. And I finally like, I need to get away out of this backyard area, because I feel like I am this fenced area, because I feel like I'm getting surrounded. So I, left the gate, locked it, and then I'm still waiting for my ride. And at this point, I'm kind of crying because I'm so stressed out and nerve-wracked. And I'm nonstop, like, rebuking it. Go where Christ sends you, stuff like that. And, then my dad finally showed up. And as soon as he drove up in his truck, his white truck, I booked it into the truck, slammed. I'm just like, what on earth took you so long? And then, of course, my dad saw how nerve-wracked I was. And, of course, I told him everything that happened. And, he's like, are you going to go back to work? And I'm like, well, obviously. I like the job. Screw the freaking entity. It just took me off guard, that's all. And so I went back to, the work the next day. I did mention it to my boss, that there was someone that showed up, and I didn't know who they were, and I had a bad feeling about him. She's like, oh, it was probably the, people to pick up the labs. And I'm like, but for them to pick up the labs, I would have had to seen them actually go to the deposit box that holds the labs. And she's like, oh, well, then I don't know. And so it's just like, whatever, and I just moved on for the most part. But of course, but with some advisement from a counselor who has worked with several satanic abuse victims, pretty much he suggested, because I still felt like I was being watched. Now, it didn't feel like this, just not to the same extent. There were certain rooms, and that, like the grooming room, and the back of the grooming room, and in particular, where it just felt heavy. And so, but again, I didn't want to leave my job. I liked my job. And so he's like, okay, well, write down, some certain memory verses and stuff, and place them around the building. I was like, well, I can't do that, at least not with anyone knowing. And I was like, okay, I'll try it. And so I did it. I got my little note cards, and I wrote all these verses, and I folded, but I didn't tell anybody I was going to do this. No, I didn't dare tell anyone I was going to do this, but I wrapped, and I know it sounds silly, but for me, I looked at it as, because I didn't think it was any, like, a magical cure or whatever. I just saw it as establishing territory and telling this thing that, that it can have free reign in the property, in the building. And so I wrote all these Bible verses down. I folded up them into little notes. And I put a hair clip on each one to keep it folded. And any place that had any sort of feeling at one point or another, I put there. I would hide it in a hard to reach spot. And remember, I started doing this. I didn't do this right away, like planting the memory verses everywhere. It was about 1 or 2 months before I actually did that part. But yeah, I hit him everywhere I could, and it actually worked. A lot of the stuff slowed down. Because before I did that, I was seeing, obviously, the first encounter, but I was constantly seeing shadow people, outside the kennels. Constantly, because I would have the door open, outside door open, just so I can take the dog, each dog out one at a time to go potty. And constantly, and I kept trying to convince myself, okay, it's just my eyes are playing tricks on me. But when that stopped, after I established territory, I realized, oh, I wasn't just seeing things. Those were actual entities. Those were shadow people. And let's see. And another time before, again, I did the Bible verse thing. There was this dog, and she was a really sweet dog. She was a sweet pit bull. But if she was very sweet. If she liked you, she liked you. But if she didn't like you, she wanted to eat you. Kind of thing. And she had some scars on her face, so it made me wonder if she hadn't been a rescue at one point or whatever. But I was very attached to the dog. And one day she just kind of looked off. And so, trusting as the dog as much as I did, some people would have thought I was really would be crazy for this, but I went into her kennel, secured the kennel door, so I'm literally just kind of locked myself in with her. Check on her, and I kneel down, and I'm like, what's wrong? And she starts growling, not at me. She's looking past me. She's looking up and past me. And I turn, I don't see anything, but she's growling still. And I'm thinking, I should probably get out of this thing. Because even though it wasn't directed at me, if an animal's already upset, and I move wrong while it's already upset and on alert, I could, freak her out, and then I get hurt. And so I get out, and I check on her, and I checked the spot where she was looking and it was above the kennels. And again, saw nothing. Told my boss, said, hey, she was growling at something. And looking in this general spot, and they're like, oh, well, maybe it's rats, because apparently they have a lot of rats, but they aren't ever inside. But they thought, well, maybe it's rats because they get rats in the barn. And it's like, well, I didn't see it, but okay. And even when I eventually cleaned that top area, there was nothing. There was no sign of any animal, no droppings or anything. And there's this one particular incident, and again, this was like in the first month. After my first incident, it was pretty much I was at home. I was sleeping, and I had this dream, this nightmare of me. Well, not a nightmare. This one was just a dream, but what happened after was nightmarish. But the dream was about me. I was warning someone about tarot cards, like specifically tarot cards, to a person and telling them the dangers of tarot cards. Well, all of a sudden I shoot up. And what's in front of me on top of my desk is this crouched, scaly looking demon. And it had, I don't know if you call it cat eyes or reptile eyes. The slitted pupils. And its eyes were yellow. But obviously this was not the same entity. This one looks like kind of similar to a paralysis demon, but it wasn't a paralysis demon, and I was able to move. So I know it wasn't that, but it was on top of my desk, and I screamed because the shock, and then a second later it was gone. Now, it was sort of a combo thing for that thing. Because later I realized, what was above it was this fox pendant that my birth mother had sent me. And I really like foxes, and so I kept it, but each time I passed it, it made me uncomfortable. I tried wearing it, and I couldn't really stay comfortable in it, with it on. It just fell off, and to the point that each time I passed it, I couldn't help but stare at it with unease. But anyway, back to the demon. It scared me so bad that I was actually trembling. I was calm when I was telling everybody about it, but my family about it, but I was shaking because of the shock. But eventually I went back to sleep and I was fine. Next day I go to work. But did you know, it's just my coworker, who groomed the dogs. She is telling everybody about how she got these tarot cards, and she was trying them out and stuff, and they were laughing and all that. And of course, I hear that, and I'm like, a chill ran up my spine. I'm like, oh, snap. Because very specifically, night before, with the demon encounter, before the demon encounter, I had a dream of warning someone about tarot cards. And so that shook me. And of course, that same day, shortly after I hear that, I'm doing my cleaning, and all of a sudden, this wasp, I don't know where, it had no business being in there. It flew at me. And I'm like, what the heck? First the snake, now the wasp. And they're like, man, you just... Because everyone's like, wow, you just keep running into things, huh? And I'm like, I guess. So yeah, it was just, and of course, like I said, oh yeah, and again, before I did, and even after, actually, it was after I did the whole memory verse, marking my territory with the memory verses, the only place that I didn't have a memory verse was in the field, which I had to walk around the perimeter each day to, pick up trash that, flies in and all that. And I would feel it watching me. And it would pace. It was pacing like it wanted to get at me, but it couldn't get at me. And it would follow me around the entire perimeter. And I knew it was watching me. I could feel it. It was mad. I felt it, how angry it was. And I know some people would kind of blow that off and say it's my imagination, but I just don't know how to explain it. Like, you just feel it. And eventually it stopped. It took a few weeks for it to finally stop. It kind of gave up. For a while. The last time it did it before it, kind of stopped for a while, it actually managed to get in the barn. It was the barn. The barn was one of the areas that was one of the last places I marked. And I hadn't marked that spot yet. And pretty much it tried to scare me in the barn. Like, it was unnaturally dark in there. And I could feel it was really strong. Like, it somehow had backup. But I rebuked it. And I carried on. And shortly after, I put the memory verse in there. And it stopped bothering me. Let's see, what else? I know it liked to affect my body sometimes. Like, each break, for some reason, I'm not really sure why my body would do this, but I would start flushing like crazy. And my body would heat up. And it happened every single time. I'd go sit down, eat, and then I start, oh, you know what? Probably because I was doing my research. My research. I was reading a lot of, like, Kurt Koch. And other, like, paranormal, like, spiritual warfare, paranormal books. And that was probably part of it. The reason why my body would start heating up. But for the most part, I was not messed with. And I apologize for just jumping all over the place. And my brain is just like this rabbit that goes where it wants. But pretty much, like I said, besides obviously the heat flashes, things were normal and it was fine. It was like nearing the past couple months before I left, because I started having problems with particularly one coworker. It wasn't the groomer. me and her actually got along really well, but it was another one, and she, but I won't, without going into detail, it was making it to the point where I'm just like, I was starting to just look for other options. And so that's when things started picking up again. And I had to start rebuking. Also, like, my boss, she was awesome, but she had a fascination for occult things, like, not like huge, but kind of, I don't know how to explain it. Like, she didn't take it seriously. But, you know. Anyway. Where was I going with this? Right, anyway. Something, I felt like someone invited in. Whether it was the tension that was actually in the building caused by this coworker I was having a problem with, or was invited back by, my boss, or even, my other coworkers. I wasn't sure. I just knew something gave it permission to come back. And I rebuked it as time before, but it didn't go away as easily. And shortly after, though, like, I ended up leaving anyway, but it was getting kind of tiring because, I was just trying. Well, I was a single mom whose son just relapsed with his cancer, and I was under a lot of stress, and I'm just like, I don't need to be in this place anyway with so much spiritual stuff going on while I'm under this much stress. And so I ended up leaving on good terms. One, like, really interesting thing than this but happened before I joined, I worked there. They actually had an incident. My boss, she was doing a surgery on this dog, and she actually had a heavy piece of equipment that flew across the room. And of course, she was freaking out. She was crying, but she was still doing the surgery, because if she just, like, suddenly stopped doing the surgery, the dog would have died. And it was successful surgery, but she was just like, she said she'd even got it on camera, and, after that, they never saw the owner or the dog again, and nothing like that happened again. So the place was already active before I got there. And I really wanted to ask her to watch the video, but at the same time, I was new, and I didn't want to look too overly excited about it, and make them think I was weird. So yeah. And it felt active, and it's remained active. Several months later, because I was still taking my dog to, because I have dogs, and that time I only had one dog, and I took my dog to an appointment, and I'm thinking, and at this point I was already debating about whether or not, like, phone apps or the little ghost hunter gadgets like an Ovilus or things similar to an Ovilus counted as a type of Ouija board. Because what are you doing? You're essentially communicating with something. And so, at that point I was thinking, well, as long as I don't talk to it, I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm just making it to where I could hear them. And so, and I was using an app that kind of used different ways to do the communication. I started off with just hearing the one with the white noise, and I took off the white noise because I can't stand white noise, but it was still making sound, and I hear something and it startles me. Like something said something and it startled me, and I'm like, oh crap. And so I start rebuking it, and I hear, what did I do? Like, it was confused, like, I'm minding my own business. You're the one who just was eavesdropping. And I switched to a different part because that part was kind of like freaking me out. So I switched to a different part, hoping that maybe seeing the text would be less nerve-wracking. And then I rebuke it, and I was like, you can't follow me home, you can't do any of this, and all that. And it said, okay. And that's where it ended, because that's when they brought my dog back out. So, but obviously I confused it. It was probably thinking, hey, I'm just minding my business. You're the one that decided to be risky. But yeah, so nothing followed me home. And at this point in time, because obviously I was a single mom, and my son had cancer, and it just required a lot of time, energy, and money to take care of everything. And so and after my divorce anyway, I didn't really have anything, and so I had moved back with my parents, and they were helping me like with my son. So when I went home, I told my dad about what I did. I confessed to him that, like, hey, I did this, and I realized what I did was wrong. I shouldn't have done it, because I realized I had made a big mistake. And I apologized, and I told him, I said, I'm never doing it again. But I wanted to let you know, because you're the spiritual leader of the house. So you're the one that, either allows or doesn't allow it. And he has the authority to break things. Like, if you invite, like, pretty much what I did, I was inviting something, and I wasn't trying to do that. That wasn't my intent. That's not what I did not want to do. But after it had done, I was like, I realized what I did. And so even though I revoked it, I told my dad so he could break like the contract kind of thing. The open door, and close the open door. And so I didn't do that again. So, yeah, and that was my time at the animal clinic, and I think that was pretty much it, besides like multiple different small things that happened, but those are the ones that I can think of right now. But the reason why I did the little phone app ghost hunter thing was just because, even though I was like 99.9% sure that what happened to me was legit, and that I wasn't crazy, I had already proven I wasn't crazy, because I had gotten myself psychologically tested, because to make sure I wasn't crazy. But I just wanted to make sure. And that kind of proved it. And so I was like, I met my goal, but, I still shouldn't have done it. And so, yeah. And that's I think one thing that people can take out of this is when you're out and about in the world outside of your home, or even inside your home, there are ways for you to declare territory. Like if you're your job, you got your office, or you got that you frequent a lot, and you feel paranormal stuff or presence going on, you can mark your territory. You could write down a memory verse and then stick it somewhere and pretty much show it that you mean business and you want to be left alone. And if you're having a lot of nightmares and stuff like that, putting memory verses all around your room, I have found to be very helpful. But without, dragging this out too long, thank you everybody for listening. Stay strong in the Lord. And thank you for your patience. This is my first time, and so I'm very nervous. But I'm going to get better with the more practice. So I hope to continue to improve to get you guys the best content I possibly can. And God bless.